First released in 2011, Sonic Generations is widely regarded as one of the best efforts in bringing the blue hedgehog into the third dimension. Building on the boost formula established in Sonic Unleashed, Generations sought to merge 2D and 3D Sonic gameplay into one cohesive whole. But Sega never really directly followed up on it. The initial reveal painted Sonic and Shadow Generations as some sort of a remaster with additional content bolted on. But in actuality, Shadow Generations is effectively the sequel to Sonic Generations built using the latest version of Hedgehog Engine. That means there's basically two games here, and I'm thrilled that Sonic Team has not forgotten how to make incredible stages. Shadow is absolutely packed with them, but along with it, some ideas that we first saw in Sonic Frontiers as well. So for this video, I wanted to take a look at the package as a whole. How does it compare to the original Sonic Generations release? What does Shadow Generations bring to the table? How does the game perform across a range of hardware, and what's going on with the Switch version? So let's get going. In its original form, Sonic Generations released on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, running at 880 by 720 at just 30 frames per second. It was an amazing game for the time, and honestly it ran a lot better than Sonic Unleashed before it, but still, 30 FPS always felt a little bit sluggish for a game like this. But thankfully, a PC version followed in its wake, bringing it up to 60 FPS, and then much later, thanks to Xbox backwards compatibility, it was possible to play the 360 version at higher resolutions on Xbox One X, and at high res and 60 FPS on Xbox Series X consoles. Now we have a new version, and as we shift over to Sonic and Shadow, the first thing you might notice is that Sonic Generations and Shadow Generations are divided up into two distinct games that you choose from the main menu. Starting with Sonic Generations, the entire user interface has been completely reworked to support 4K. That means text and graphics are super sharp and clear. Loading times are also extremely fast, and they added a new profile system allowing multiple saves. In addition, all the pre-rendered cutscenes have been recreated at 4K versus the original rather ugly 720p videos in that 360 game. While many cutscenes were real-time, the video-based scenes stood out like a sore thumb even on the original platforms, and as you can see, Sega did a fantastic job with improving the visual quality. That said, weirdly enough, the game has been rewritten and voiced in English. I didn't even notice this initially, but yeah, it's a completely new script. However, after switching the game to Japanese, I quickly realized that the dialogue was completely different between the two. So, loading it up on 360, it's easy to confirm that, yes, the English version has been rewritten, but the Japanese is fully intact.
Tails!
This chemical plant feels familiar.
Tails!
This is definitely the chemical plant, but we're not remotely on West Side Island. I'd never forget a smell like this. And that pink water makes me really nervous for some reason. Did that monster do this?
We'll figure it out later. Our friends come first.
Which can also create a weird issue. If you were to say, combine the Japanese voice acting with English text, it wouldn't match at all.
この場所来たことあるよね。このツンとする薬品の匂い。そしてあのピンク色の水にも嫌な思い出が。
そうだな、テイルス。俺たちは確かに一度ここに来たことがある。
The big question I had though, does this new version of Sonic Generations overcome the limitations of the original, or are there instances where you might still prefer that 2011 version? Well, if you're playing on any of the PlayStation consoles, it's your only option, and it's a good one, thankfully. Whether you're on PS4, PS4 Pro, or PS5, all versions of the original Sonic Generations run at 60 frames per second. And it's an excellent version of Sonic Generations in that regard. It looks great, it's super sharp, and it runs like a dream. On PlayStation 5, it runs at a native 4K, but even the PS4 and Pro versions fare well. Now, if you're on Xbox, the choices are a little less clear. If you're using an Xbox One or One X, this is the only way to get 60 frames per second. On the Series consoles, however, the Xbox 360 version running in backwards compatibility mode also runs at 60 frames per second. So, which is better? The new version has the higher resolution UI and videos, which is nice. But to hint at something later, I'm not super happy with the texture filtering in this version, and I had kinda suspected that the Xbox backwards compatibility mode would correct this, but in the case of Sonic, that's not actually the case. So there's basically no real advantage to playing the older version of the game on a modern Xbox. But here's the weird thing, I covered the BC version in the past and it was awesome, right? But unfortunately, at least on my Xbox Series X, it no longer works correctly. Basically, there's stutters and skips in both the gameplay and the audio, like this. As you can see from my older coverage, you can see that that was absolutely not the case before. So what the heck is going on? Well, I rebooted, I cleared the quick resume data, I made sure there were no downloads occurring and more, and honestly, I never found a way to fix it. It always ran this way. No other Xbox 360 games suffered from this problem, so I left kind of confused. Something has gone wrong, making this version less playable. Still, if we look at the new version of Sonic Generations, it's nice that it's great on basically every console. Wait, I forgot one. The Nintendo Switch. Okay, given that Generations is originally an Xbox 360 and PS3 game, one that even supports stereoscopic 3D, mind you, I expected the Switch version to be pretty good. And it almost is, but it's shipped with one major issue. So for starters, image quality is fine. It's 1080p, so it looks sharper than the older version, but once you start moving, you might notice something. It doesn't look as smooth as it should. So if we bring up the frame rate graph, well, you can see that it actually runs around 31 frames per second. Why is that an issue? Well, look at the frame times here. Essentially with this setup, there's a constant stutter happening where the frame time spikes. It basically means that the game's frame rate does not divide evenly into the refresh rate, and as a result, it never looks as smooth as it should. The 360 version is better looking at a stable 30 FPS. Well-known Switch modder, Masagrator as known on social media, managed to track down this little snippet of code, which is responsible for this 31.5 frames per second lock, as well as the odd high CPU utilization. What he's saying here matches our performance data, and it's not great. The PC version is also a little tricky. So indeed, the new version is a separate application, and like on consoles, does not benefit from updated technology used in the Shadow Generations portions of the package. The one nice thing here is that the configuration for things like resolution and image quality is now handled from the game's menu, rather than that stupid launcher that always misbehaves. By and large, it looks basically the same as the stock 2011 version, but it does not yet support mods, though I'm sure that'll change soon enough. There's just one problem. If you play this version on a monitor running at a refresh rate other than 60 Hz, the game does not update smoothly. It has this jerky look to it. What I think is happening is that the same frame rate cap issue I noted on Switch is playing out here. So if you play on, say, a 120 Hz monitor, it's not able to limit the frame rate correctly and winds up looking somewhat choppier. G-Sync does not fix this either, by the way. You need to set your display to 60 Hz before playing the game if you want a smooth experience, which is not the case for the 2011 original, where it automatically does that for you. Also, just like on consoles, anisotropic filtering is set to a lower level by default, and you can't change it from the in-game options. Thankfully, you can force it from your graphics card control panel, but it's kind of a hassle that you need to do that. To answer that original question though, the 2011 version really only has value if you're playing on PC. The community has poured so much into the 2011 version, and there's so many benefits to sticking with it for now. Especially in terms of mods, because there's some amazing stuff out there. So that's basically kind of a summary of where the original Sonic Generations stands in this new collection. The good news here really is that Sonic Generations itself is still a fantastic game, and most versions are really good. Honestly, the visuals haven't really been touched up, and it's wild to me that a 2011 game can look this good. It really shows how strong Sonic Team's art direction was on this game, not to mention the benefits of the Hedgehog engine, which can handle these gigantic courses moving at a very high speed without breaking a sweat. But of course, this is the Hedgehog engine circa 2011. As we shift over to Shadow Generations, we're given a look at an updated version of this in-house technology running in a larger scale game. This is truly the centerpiece of this collection. So at its core, it follows a similar design to Sonic Generations. That is, you're going through classic stages and slowly unlocking new ones within this sort of white, empty world. The big differences lie in how that unlocks in addition to the storytelling. Basically, the story is now much more like a Sonic adventure game with more dramatic cutscenes, including those that play out while you're actually in a stage. And this is paired with the improved white space concept from Generations, which has been transformed into a full 3D map inspired by Sonic Frontiers. That's a lot of concepts, but the key here is this. Between each of the action stages, you move about in this full 3D map, and by completing challenges, you essentially fill in the void. It's a really smart change that leverages everything the team learned when building Sonic Frontiers, but in a more focused way. It's a lot more interesting than the side-scrolling map that was in the original Generations. But the highlight for me is, of course, the new action stages themselves, which, like the original Generations, are inspired by stages from past Sonic titles. But they don't go back to the 16-bit era. Instead, it starts with games like Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, 2006, Forces, and even Sonic Frontiers. They're all absolutely beautiful and fully realize the concepts that were perhaps not well executed in their original form. Compared to Generations, there's also more of a cinematic flair with some crazy camera work during the stages and plenty of slick, cool cinematic sequences. I absolutely love playing through these stages. Of course, as noted, this is built on the much newer version of Hedgehog Engine and basically operates with a completely different set of settings and performance targets when compared to that original Sonic Generations. For starters, when played on a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X, you get a performance mode and a quality mode, just like Sonic Frontiers. Quality mode is basically as you'd expect. It runs at a higher resolution, but it's capped at 30 FPS, and it's just not worth it in this game. Furthermore, the 30 FPS cap seems to have some issues with frame pacing, which manifest during play like this. So not only is it significantly less smooth, it's also less stable looking. Weirdly enough, the 30 FPS cap seems to work a little better on PlayStation 5. There's still these occasional little dips here, but the more severe frame pacing issues never really reared their head. But it's ultimately kind of pointless anyway, since I really don't recommend this mode at all. Like Sonic Frontiers and unlike Sonic Generations, Shadow features temporal anti-aliasing and dynamic resolution scaling. It tops out around 1800p or so in the performance mode while delivering a very stable 60 frames per second experience. It goes up to 4K in quality mode, but again, it's only 30 FPS there. But there's also a pleasant surprise in store for Series S owners. You see, unlike Sonic Frontiers, this time the S version also has a quality and performance mode. So both Sonic Generations and Shadow Generations can now run at 60 FPS on the S. The resolution does take a significant hit in Shadow, but honestly it's worth it for that added fluidity. Unfortunately, all last generation consoles only support 30 frames per second in Shadow Generations, so if you're still using them, it's the best you're gonna get. Given the leap in fidelity and similarities to Frontiers, however, it's not entirely surprising. Unfortunately, when it comes to Nintendo Switch, things are a lot worse. While it doesn't have the 31.5 FPS issue of Generations 1, it does instead exhibit severe unstable frame pacing, which results in an experience that feels noticeably less stable than any other version. It looks okay enough visually speaking, but it sure feels a lot worse to play. Furthermore, loading times are a lot longer, making jumping in and out of stages a lot less enjoyable as well. On the flip side though, the PC version is excellent as it offers full support for 120 frames per second gameplay without requiring a mod to achieve it. It feels significantly smoother than any other version of the game and also allows you to boost things like resolution up to native 4K. The in-game menu has quite a few options compared to Sonic Generations, but it is unfortunately missing modern things like DLSS, FSR, and the like. One other thing to note is that, like Generations, the texture filtering is somewhat poor by default. Every version has issues with texture filtering on steep angles, but it's here on PC using your GPU control panel where you can actually correct this issue. It shouldn't be an issue at all, but at least you can fix it here. I also noticed some issues with the game's TAA and or reconstruction system. If you stand still, not that you do that often in a Sonic game, you can see the pixel edges sort of warbling around in the distance. It makes the entire thing look somewhat unstable. Honestly though, when you step back, there's just a ton of data to sift through here when you break it down. There's 9 unique versions of this game, and within the game is 2 very different games with their own settings. If you then factor in the performance mode options, that makes for 22 permutations essentially. So let me simplify it like this. PS5 and Xbox Series consoles both deliver a smooth 60 frames per second across the board. It's a great way to play the game. The PC version is the most performant of all, but it has a few issues with Generations 1 as far as the refresh rate of your monitor. The last generation consoles are all split between 60 FPS for Generations 1 or 30 FPS for Shadow, while the Switch version comes in last, struggling to deliver the whole package. So yeah, it's an interesting situation for sure. But still, despite all this, the game itself is exceptionally well made and certainly worth checking out, especially if you enjoy Boost Sonic style games. Shadow Generations itself is among the best playing 3D titles in the Sonic series to date, and the game itself is as long or longer than Generations 1. Shadow himself also plays a little differently. It's easier to move him around in tight spaces and everything just feels more responsive and immediate, with its own unique physics and quirks. They also layer in some additional powers to help keep things fresh, along with plenty of epic boss fights, which I think are a lot better than those in the first generations. The last major important feature though is the sound. In typical Sonic fashion, Frontiers features an excellent soundtrack boasting a huge range of new arrangements, new songs, and the return of classics. I'm always a sucker for those moments when Crush 40 kicks in just before you take on a boss. It's great stuff, right?
貫かれるがいい。伸びろ。伸びろ。
Ultimately though, I'm really happy with this one. Sonic and Shadow Generations is a fantastic game, and it ended up being something a lot larger in scope than I expected. As DF's lone Sonic fan, I'm happy to say that Sonic Team has done a good job here. It's just a shame that the Switch version struggles so much to run well, as that would have been a large audience for this game, I'm sure. But that's going to do it for this video, so thanks for watching.